we now have an opportunity for you to ask questions of Kim and Adriana. So Kim will rejoin us. I have seen that there's a few questions already in the Q&A. As I indicated, people could use the Q&A rather than the chat for any questions. And if you see questions in there you'd like to have answered, you can also vote for a question, because that way it'll help me to prioritize the questions that are asked. So look, the first question, perhaps I'll ask just out of those that are here, and possibly direct it to you in the first instance, Kim. It's about brain neuroplasticity. So the question is, how does brain neuroplasticity enable children to respond or react and overcome intergenerational trauma or not?
It's such a great question, and it's, I think, one of the most exciting things that we can have in our toolbox as clinicians, because we know now that the more we do something, the more we change the basic neural architecture of our brain. So if we start to teach children about how their brains work, what we teach them in mindfulness is that, you can change your brain to change your mind, to change your brain. So in terms of, and this is where I sort of started with my research, is if we can develop early intervention programs for these children so that they're already starting to become aware of how their brains work, how they respond to different stresses, what they can do about those responses, then at a very fundamental, we're changing the architecture of their brain. So I do believe that neuroplasticity is going to become more and more part of the psychology toolbox.
Thank you. Maybe if I could pick up on another question and perhaps direct this to you, Adriana, because you talked about psychoeducation in your presentation. Can you please explain psychoeducation in a simple way, and also are clients easily receptive to this method of treatment or strategy?
Yes, the psychoeducation provided have been in the context of what he's feeling is normal reaction that his body has towards the trauma that he's experienced, not just his own trauma, but the trauma that he's inherited from his family and ancestors. And the psychoeducation on how the body works, how the trauma impacts the mind and the brain, and how he could change and rewrite and do that. So Murad is a very intelligent man, although he doesn't have very high education. So he responds quite well to the things that I explained to him about the mind and the body and the impact of trauma. And he does his best to understand and work on those.
Okay, thank you. A question perhaps could be answered by either of you, but perhaps maybe Kim in the first instance. So I was wondering if there are any findings or insights into the behaviour of perpetrators and the descendants, and how this might have an impact on genocide survivors and their descendants. For example, governments who categorically deny that a genocide happened versus governments who show genuine remorse and take responsibility for the crimes that were committed by their ancestors.
There's some amazing documentaries. The two that come to mind, both of them are actually about a man by the name of Hans Frank, who was, Nicholas Frank, who was the child of Hans Frank, who was the Governor General of Poland, and he was responsible for the death of not only millions of Jews, but hundreds of thousands of Poles. And Nicholas Frank decided that he was going to distance himself from his father. So the one documentary is called Hitler's Children, and it's about the offspring of a lot of the high-ranking Nazi officials, and the other one is called My Nazi Legacy. There is no doubt, and there's another book called Survivor Cafe, where it's about the bringing together of perpetrators. Sorry, those are my dogs. Perpetrators and victims. I'll just let them out. Perpetrators and victims in the hotel where the high-ranking Nazi officials had their summer holidays. And whilst I haven't done a lot of research, I know that Germany as a country today has taken full responsibility for the crimes committed against humanity and for the war crimes that were perpetrated by the Nazis. And it is mandatory, more so than it is even in Australia, that every single student in Germany has Holocaust education and goes to Poland to visit the camps. And as a result, I think that the generation of young Germans is a remarkable generation. And I do think that the fact that they're not denying what happened is such a healthy response. Certainly in Poland, we see an amazing collaboration between Germany, Israel, and Poland in terms of the restoration, commemoration, and upkeep of the sites. Whereas in some of the other Eastern Bloc countries, there are no plaques, there are no memorials, there's almost a complete denial. And I would argue that cannot be healthy for the emerging generation, because it's like a shadow. You know, whereas in Germany, where it's much more transparent, I think it's a much healthier way to respond.
Thanks. Adriana, do you have some comments just in relation to this?
Look, while I was, I didn't think it was relevant to include in these slides, but when I was doing the reading and research on this topic, I came across some research done on the Aboriginal Australians. And the fact that the genocide and this is not recognized and accepted, the trauma continues.
Right.
Okay, and this implies, and I can see, being an Armenian, I can see this happening in the Armenian community, okay, and the Armenian people all across the world. Until such time that this intergenerational, this genocide and this awful things that have happened are recognized and accepted, there will not be a closure. I can see Kim nodding her head. So this trauma continues and passes down from generation to generation. But when there is some kind of accountability, responsibility, acceptance by the perpetrators, then the whole country, the whole community, they can stop and have a closure and work towards healing. And that could hopefully be stopped. But unfortunately, it's not something that happens very easily and quickly.
I think, like, if you look at the fact that Germany took 1.5 million refugees at the outbreak of the Syrian war, I think that's like living proof of a country that is healing, that they have the capacity to do that. Whereas when you think about some of the other countries in Europe where the borders were literally shut in people's faces. So I think there is something really interesting about the question, Ferdinand, about governments that take responsibility and those that don't.
Great, thank you. Another question, I'll direct this to you, Kim. It's from Ilya Vutel. Wonderful presentation. Thank you, Kim. My question, how can we further mobilize both the intergenerational and transgenerational memories of survivors of the Holocaust to combat the resurgence of neo-Nazi activities around the world and including Australia?
To be perfectly honest with you, Ilya, that is like the part of my job that gives me the most joy, and it's the work that I do at the museum, because the professional programs are designed to do exactly that. So not only about neo-Nazis, but any form of hate speech, any sort of hate crime, whether it's Islamophobia or homophobia or anti-Semitism. We have an opportunity at the museum to speak with people, and we use the lessons of the Holocaust to teach about the really deleterious consequences of leaving that sort of stuff unchecked. Now, having said that, it's kind of overwhelming because it's a drop in the ocean. But if you allow yourself to be overwhelmed by the enormity of it, we'll do nothing. And so the way that I do it is, if I can change one person's mind in a presentation, if I get somebody to walk through the doors of the museum and I can get them to think differently, and again, we use lots of neuroscience and in-group and out-group behavior, then I have to believe that there are more good people on this planet than bad people. And if we can just do this work one person at a time, that's all I can say, because the rise of that sort of stuff is alarming and it's scary, and the only antidote to it is for good people not to do nothing.
Thank you. Another question, I'll direct this to you, I think, Adriana. It's from Raki Khanna. With the current situation in the sector, I think talking about the helping professions and staff shortages and long waiting lists, are you able to share simple tools and strategies for professionals to suggest to our clients? I think this is around dealing with impact of trauma, and so things that may be I don't know, possibly shorter term type interventions or things that could assist you.
Yes, I think going back to the basics of counseling, basic tools like being non-judgmental. Obviously with trauma work, you don't ask questions, but make the client comfortable so that they would share their story rather than poking and asking a lot of questions. So you want to wait for the clients to volunteer and provide information voluntarily. But and providing a non-judgmental support and counseling to client, and that is throughout not just the verbally you say this and you provide this, but your body language has to also reflect that you're non-judgmental and you're not scared of them, and just providing a lot of listening and and go where the client takes you. So it's not having your own agenda, but rather listening and validating to the injustice that they have experienced.
Okay, thank you. Another question, I'll perhaps direct this towards you, Kim. It's from Kaho Cheng. Is it possible to rewrite the collective narrative of the trauma?
Oh, that's a big question. I don't think we should be rewriting the collective narrative, because I think in essence then we cancel it. I think we have to acknowledge the trauma, the collective trauma, and I think it informs who we are. So for me, it's not about rewriting it, but it's about broadening our scope of understanding to go, yes, there's this collective trauma and we have to acknowledge it. Exactly as Adriana was just saying, we have to be witnesses. We have to validate. We have to acknowledge what that collective trauma is. But at the same time, we have to help our clients see that they are not only identified by their trauma, but also by their coping and their resilience and their fortitude and their generosity. And because I think it's so easy just to get caught up in the one narrative. And I guess I think if we just broaden that, we don't have to rewrite it, but we can incorporate a different aspect to it, which I think actually makes it more powerful.
Mm-hmm. Adriana, any comments you'd like to make on that?
Completely agree. You don't want to.
No.
The whole purpose is to witness and validate. Why would we want to rewrite?
Okay. A question that perhaps either you could pick up. Can you recommend any First Nations people from Australia who are speaking or writing about trauma and thriving in spite of or because of it? I think that's possibly picking up on post-traumatic growth issues, but yeah, both of you, if you've got any particular comments on that.
Look, I don't have authors, but I think we need to work a bit more on recognizing and acknowledging that the trauma that the First Nations have experienced and are experiencing, because if we don't, we are continuing this cycle. We are
the work
not putting in it, yeah.
Of Goldsmith, who I quoted in my research, came from a paper, and I can't remember, so I don't quote me on this, but I think it's called Braveheart, and it's an incredible, for me, it was an incredible resource that sort of spoke much more specifically to the Indigenous story, and it's very possible that through there we could find some links to people who are working more specifically in that sector.
Yeah, can I just add that in my references, there is a book with various chapters, and that one is quite a comprehensive literature on the Aboriginal intergenerational trauma relating to the Australian Aboriginal community. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Another one is touching in some ways on some aspects around post-traumatic growth, but it is known that people can survive, this is from Borka Lichinen, it is known that people can survive a war and grow as resilient human beings. However, how is it possible to overcome injustice, dispossession, and reconcile this with loss of ethnic identity?
I think, I mean, that's sort of what I was alluding to when I was speaking about the sort of collective trauma and the systemic trauma, because when the trauma is still current, as Adriana was saying earlier, when there's still oppression and dispossession and social and economic disadvantage, and you know, the loss of ethnic identity, I think it's very difficult to be resilient. But I do believe that there are what we call glimmers, or there are moments or communities that are showing remarkable resilience. And again, I think we do ourselves a grave disservice when we make it an either or. I think it has to be a both. I think that we are, as human beings, hardwired to survive. And so despite the most hideous systemic and institutional oppression, which is different to war and genocide, I still believe, I have to believe in my heart, otherwise I couldn't do the work that I do, that there are individuals who are overcoming and growing through this.
Okay, thank you. A question for you, Adriana, from Carly Mafficioni. I was curious to hear some examples of the way that Murad was able to express his anger in a more productive way.
Look, acknowledging Murad's anger, listening to his anger, and listening and acknowledging the injustice that he has experienced. And some of the readings and teachings from Islam, because he goes to mosque every day and he practices various Islamic rituals, and some of the teachings from Islam that I have been able to find and read to him and identify to him, and I try to provide like an education on where that anger is coming from and why is he feeling that anger. And that's a representation of how he feels and how he has never been felt heard, you know, or had a voice. But also trying to put it into some volunteering work and some help with his mosque, or helping some other people who are asylum seekers. So he often calls me and he says, "Oh, I have this friend who needs this. Do you know where he could go for this, or this doctor?" You know, so when he feels he has more control over his life, he has been able to express less anger. That's how he has presented to me.
Okay, thank you. Having a little trouble, not too much, but a little trouble with your microphone again. So maybe, I'm not sure.
Okay.
That's good. Yeah, we were able to pick it all up, but yeah, in future, just so you're aware. Look, we are coming to the end of our time together. There are couple more questions, so I think I'll run through them if I can quickly, and then there's one or two things we'll say to finish up. This question, is there any research on legacies of the Holocaust on Germans immediately following the war and to present and to present day, for example, collective guilt and shame? Maybe something from that you would like to address, Kim?
Yes, there very much there is stuff. I'm not an expert or across it in any way, but as I was saying earlier, because Germany as a country have fully owned their responsibility for what happened, I think it creates a safe space for people to come out and talk about the guilt and the collective guilt and the collective shame. And just as an example, Germany provide most of the funding for the maintenance of the Holocaust sites in Poland. So, for example, when I'm sure in your mind's eye, you can imagine the fences at Auschwitz, there's the barbed wire and the concrete. The concrete had started to disintegrate. And then there was a question about, well, if we fill it with more new concrete, then it feeds into Holocaust denial to say, oh, well, that didn't really happen. So how do we preserve these concrete barriers so that we preserve the site of Auschwitz, but at the same time don't feed into Holocaust denial? And Germany were the country that funded the restoration of the columns at Auschwitz. So I think that it's a sign of they take responsibility for the collective shame and guilt. But in terms of research, I don't have specific papers to point you in the direction of, but I'm pretty sure that there's quite a lot out there.
Thank you. So one final question: how could providing treatment to clients suffering from intergenerational trauma affect us as health professionals, who also might be from ancestry, who are survivors of trauma? And hear from both of you. I think perhaps from you, Adriana, first, and then for Kim.
Look, being aware of the triggers, yeah. Being aware of, especially if you are a survivor of intergenerational trauma, I'd say being aware of the triggers and self-care, and if needed, getting counseling and getting supervision as well. Self-care is very important, extremely important. As you can see, I'm a survivor of intergenerational trauma, and it's something that's present every day in my life that I can see. But being aware of it, being aware of the triggers and being triggered, but self-care and looking after ourselves.
Thanks. And Kim?
Yeah, I totally agree with Adriana. It's self-care and potentially your own therapeutic journey, and then definitely supervision. You might not be ready to go on the therapeutic journey, but just by making some of that unconscious stuff conscious gives you the space to choose, rather than when those triggers happen, they're happening at an unconscious level and you're responding without thought. So yeah, all of those things: self-care, supervision, and your own therapeutic journey.
Thank you. So look, at this point, we have gone a little over time, so unfortunately I won't be able to, there's one or two other questions there, but I won't be able to get to those. I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank you both. Thank you, Kim, for your terrific presentation, and also to you, Adriana, for a wonderful presentation. Thank you to both of you for what you've brought to us tonight. It's been a really, really engaging couple of, well, almost an hour and a half, I think it is now. So thank you to you both. There are a couple of things I'll say just as we're finishing up. I'd also just acknowledge all the people who were online tonight. We think we had more than 130 people online, and people from all around Australia, many of our colleagues from Torture and Trauma Treatment Services in other states and territories in Australia, and also from several people who've participated from overseas tonight. I noticed a colleague from Dignity put their hand up and said they were on the line, and there have been many others. So thank you to everyone who's been online and listening to these two great presentations, and also for you putting forward your questions.